Hello again. There was a time when anybody wishing to find stuff out was obliged to hunt in libraries and archives to track down information for themselves. For instance, over 50 years ago, I was interested in anarchism and I wished to find out about the murder of a policeman in Tottenham in 1909, a crime committed by anarchist revolutionaries from one of the Baltic states. It was known as the Tottenham outrage. These days, anybody with a mobile telephone can simply type that phrase, Tottenham outrage, into Google, and hey presto, up come the details. In 1970, when I wished to find out about it, I had to go to the Guildhall Library in central London, where they had microfilm copies of the Times for that year. Then I had to thread the film onto a spool and search laboriously for the details. This meant that I had to consult primary sources rather than relying upon what other people had written or said about the business many years later. In one way, the situation is a lot better these days, in that information is more freely available. But in others, it is worse, because much of that information which people find after Googling a subject is false. It might just be mistaken or inaccurate, but it can also be sheer invention. Unfortunately, in the modern world, a lot of people don't seem to realise this. And so if they look up a subject, say something which happened over 60 years ago, say in 1961, they are content if they come across a magazine article about the subject which was written 30 years later in the 1990s, long after the event. They stop at this point. It is a sobering thought that this is often how school children and teenagers find things out, just by looking at the first 2 or 3 hits when they are searching for something. It's a recognised thing. There's a whole area where people devote their time to what's called SEO, search engine optimization. And the idea is that if you have a business or you're trying to promote something, you find ways that search engines will bring up your site and put it at the top, because it's well known that unless something is in the first 4 or 5 hits at the top of the page, 99% of people won't even look at it. They just look at what comes up at the top when they Google something. The result is that myths and legends flourish as never before in the modern world. I saw a marvellous instance of this yesterday, although it's something of which I've been aware for a long time. I was debating on another channel about post-war immigration, when several people popped up and claimed that as Minister of Health, Enoch Powell was responsible for recruiting nurses from the Caribbean and encouraging them to come to this country. Now, this is a very silly idea, and I shall explain why in a moment. I simply pointed out, though, that it was not true. Whereupon a number of people Googled the subject quickly and then posted links to articles written in the 1990s as proof that I was obviously mistaken. The main one that came up was an article from the Spectator magazine published in 1996. It was a film review. I give a link to this in the description to this video. The headline to the piece is "When Enoch Powell Recruited Blacks," and the article contains the following sentence: Enoch Powell, as Minister of Health 1960 to 63, recruited nurses from there for the National Health Service, and from there is referring to the Caribbean, West Indies. For those who disagreed with me, this was proof positive that I was wrong in what I had said. There was the truth in black and white in a magazine and found on the internet. I found such gullibility horrifying, but it seemed that everybody commenting was content with what somebody had written in a film review from almost 30 years ago. which is to say over 30 years after the event. Perhaps I ought to explain here that in the 1990s, this story about Enoch Powell was devised and appeared from thin air. I don't know who started it, or if it was a group of people, or what happened, but sometime in the early 1990s, the story about Enoch Powell inviting black nurses to come here when he was Minister of Health appeared. It has found its way into material published by the National Health Service, and the more that the lies circulated, the more references would be found to it on Google. The fact that none of these date any earlier than 1990 should be enough to cause people to smell a rat, but such is the faith in the internet, nobody wishes to question what is seen there very often. It's such a good story. Imagine horrible old Enoch Powell, the wicked racist, complaining about all those black people when it was him who had arranged for lots of them to come here in the first place. It was delicious, and I quite see why people wish to believe this fairy tale. The truth is that between 1960 and 1963, when Enoch Powell was Minister of Health, the Ministry of Health had no role at all in recruiting nurses from overseas. It was entirely the responsibility of local health authorities or the governing bodies of individual hospitals. Even had he wanted to, Powell could not have played any role in the business. How can we check this? How can we see whether I'm telling the truth about this? Well, it's easy enough. Instead of just Googling Enoch Powell's name and adding as search terms things like West Indies and nurses, we can look specifically at contemporary records, many of which have been digitised and placed online. I can use the British newspaper archives, of course, to which I have access, but anybody can look at Hansard, the record of parliamentary debates. You don't have to pay a fee for that. So it is that with a minute's work, we come up with the exchange in Parliament, to which I give a link in the description to this video. It's a brief passage when an MP asked Edith Pitt, the parliamentary secretary to the Ministry of Health, the following question. There were staff shortages at a hospital in the north of England, and the MP said, will the Honourable Lady look at the possibility of recruitment in Jamaica, the West Indies and other places in which I am told there is a reservoir of people who are willing and able to come to this country and who would make an excellent additional contribution to British nursing staffs. Now, if the Ministry of Health had anything at all to do with recruiting nurses from the Caribbean at this time, then here was an opportunity to mention it. Instead, Miss Pitt replied, the question of recruiting staff must be a matter for the Board of Governors, and I have no doubt they will read what the Honourable Gentleman has said today. And there we have it. The recruiting of nursing staff from the Caribbean was simply nothing at all to do with the Ministry of Health at that time, the time that Enoch Powell was the minister. It was the responsibility of local health authorities and the governing bodies of individual hospitals. It would take 2 or 3 minutes to find out something like this, instead of just reading the top couple of hits from a search and thinking about, say, how to refine the search terms by year and so on. But amazingly, this is not a skill taught in schools. It's enough for the teachers if the pupils just come up with something, anything, when they're writing their homework. It is for this reason that I say that the internet can be both a blessing and a curse for researching the past. It can save having to trek to a library and examine microfilm records, which is good. But on the other hand, it contains so many lies that filtering them out is something of an art. Filtering out lies and misinformation on the internet is an art which can be taught, but seldom is. The result is that the rising generation, which should be one of the best informed in the history of the world, having access at their fingertips to all human knowledge, is often more ignorant of actual facts than young people were a century ago. Their heads are often filled with myths and downright falsehoods. And this is a very scary thought.